Hey everyone, Livy here, back with another video. We are doing, sorry, I lost my moment. We are doing February monthly musings. At the time of me filming this, it is very early March, and so I'm a little delayed. Sorry about that. By the time you guys even see it, it might be even a little more delayed. You can probably tell, recently in the month of March, little sneak peek for the rest. I did sprain my wrist. I'll talk more about that in March, though. We're not going to get into that today. Just know my movements might be a little awkward, and they might be for a few videos, so just so you know what's up. But anyways, this is the February monthly musing. We're going to talk about what happened in February, not what's happening right now in March, because that's a shit show. But anyways, let's talk February. February this year, by the way, was a leap year. And even though it had 29 days this year, let me tell you, February went by super, super fast. For some reason, it was just very chaotic and I was just very go, go, go. And everything was what it was. But we're going to start by talking about life stuff. Then I'm going to talk about books and then I'll talk about tarot. So yeah, let's get into it. February was an interesting month because I did have there was 1 week in February that I had off. Like students had it off too, so I had it off. And that was cool. So because of that kind of going on and just like how the weekends were setting up, I feel like February was a month in which I was frequenting a lot of cafes just to like randomly do things in the middle of the day. If I remember, I'm going to post some photos of this, but yeah, I had a lot of cafe day trips. Like there was a day, so I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm not going to disclose exactly where, of course, but like there was day trips where I went to places in the Bay, like San Mateo, Menlo Park, even Sunnyvale, parts of Sunnyvale that I've never had been to and gone to. So that was pretty cool. There was even this cool, again, if I remember to take put a photo here. I even had a day where I went to this cool Japanese garden, like Japanese inspired garden. It was kind of small, but it was still pretty, in San Mateo. But that day was also extremely rainy. So yeah, February also had a lot of rain and storms, and it was what it was. February, of course, is also the month of Valentine's Day, and because I have a fiance, oh yeah, I can't wear my ring right now because my my fingers are swelling up. But my Valentine's Day was nice for me and my fiance. We celebrated, had a nice dinner. Again, if I remember, I'll put a picture. But yeah, February was just really busy and chaotic too because my mom and I and my partner were trying to schedule visits to wedding venues now because we have to apparently we have to check this out if you're going to get married. Shocker. So we went to the first of that and the place looks very beautiful, the first place we went to, but it's a little pricey, so I'm hoping some of these other places are cheaper, but we will see what's going on with that. And in the month of February, too, I have to say I did do less tarot than I did in January, but I still had my tarot meetup. You know how I think I mentioned that in January. I started doing my own tarot meetup group for people in person. And based on the one I had in January, people were like, well, we would really like, basics of how to get into tarot. So I shit you not, guys. I wrote out a whole, this is, oh, by the way, and it's like an image of it because originally I wrote it on paper, but I wrote out whole packet thingy just for beginners, like saying how to start it, how to, like, what tarot spreads to start with, all this stuff. It was massive. But yeah, I had this whole packet. I gave it to whoever showed up. I think there was like 5 people who came to that tarot meetup group, but it was just for beginners, like people trying to get into tarot, knowing how they should start, what they should do, all that jazz. Yeah, so that also happened in the month of February. And yeah, but now that that's done, I feel like I'm rushing through this, but I'm also trying to like prioritize other things. Give me a second and you guys are going to see in the month of February, despite it only being 29 days, I somehow read 6 books. So that's a lot. And I'm going to show those. And then after that, of course, I will show the tarot decks I was using during the month. So give me 1 second. And I'm going to start with the first book that I read in the month of February. Okay, everyone, back. Let's talk about this. Yeah, I've read 6 books during the month of February. So that was like the biggest win of February, is that I also read a lot. And in February, the first book I was reading, it kind of carried over from like end of January, like maybe the last 2 days of January into February, was this one. This is called The Wager by David Gran. This is a historical nonfiction book about something that actually happened. And the full title is The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder. So, yeah, everything outlined in this book basically happened before, okay? And it was basically a shipwreck called The Wager. They were trying to go around the Strait of Magellan during this war that England was having with Spain at the time. And basically they get shipwrecked, and it just outlines everything that happened in that. So I gave, if I'm looking at my little notes here, I gave this book 4 stars, okay? And let me start by talking about some of the good things, and then I'll get into the things that are not necessarily bad, but they were just not for me with this book, okay? So I would say the good in this book for sure was the writing and all the research involved. I think it was great too at providing the different perspectives of all the people that were involved. It didn't just focus on one person. It really examined like everyone who was involved in the shipwreck and mutiny. The events in this book, of course, were also fascinating, if not gruesome. And they did not, and I also like that the author did not shy away from mentioning things about like colonialism and a lot of like the stupid shit the British and the Spanish were doing. Did not gloss over that. So that was plus. Now, some things to note and things that I was not okay with, okay? The events that are depicted in this book are described very, very vividly and very gruesomely. Also, if you are interested in nonfiction, historical nonfiction in general, I do want to preface this by saying, please, 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 look at the trigger warnings for this book before going into it. Some of the things I can say right off the bat without trying to give too much spoilers was that there were a lot of things obviously involving death, involving murder, potential cannibalism, animal death and cruelty, graphic depictions of like physical illness stuff. There's a lot of trigger warnings in here. And I think it was those trigger warnings that me not knowing what I was getting into, some of it, that made me very upset. So that's part of the reason why I could not give this book a 5 stars. It was just, this book too, was very depressing to read. This is not a book you start reading if you are already starting to go into like a bad mental decline, because this might just make it worse. So just be aware of that too. So overall, fascinating account of real life events, but because of the gruesome depictions and choices the characters made, I would probably not also reread this. So is what it is. I did read this one because it was for my reading challenge. I had to read a bestseller, and this is still, at the time of me reading it, it was still on the New York Times bestseller list. So yeah, that was The Wager. But let me get into the next book. Okay. The next book that I read during the month of February was called One for All. This is by Lily Lainoff. This author, oops, my brain is like pooping out. Let me start backwards. Okay, this is a YA historical book. Well, historical fic, kind of like verging on adventure fantasy. I'll explain that in a second. But this is This is inspired by the Three Musketeers. This is like a reimagining of the Three Musketeers, kind of. So that's why I say it's like historical fantasy adventure kind of thing, because I don't know what most people would consider the Three Musketeers in that vein. You know what I mean? But yeah, this is a YA version, reimagining of the Three Musketeers. And the author in question is an author who has a disability. She has POTS, and so her main character, interestingly enough, also has the condition known as POTS. I don't know much about it. The author, I think, though, she talks a lot about it, but basically the main character in question has the disability, and so a lot of this book is her grappling with that and like learning how to become this great like sword fighter, despite the fact that she's always dizzy and spinning out of control and like fainting a lot. So yeah, so good thing with this book, there was great disabled rep in my opinion. This book also was really good to read. I did like this. So let me start by saying I did give this book a 4.5-ish stars because of this disabled rep was good. I also thought this book had great pacing and character development. I felt like a lot of the characters really got a chance to be developed. And I was actually just surprised really at how great the pacing was, because I think this book, yeah, if I'm looking at this correctly, yeah, this book was only 387 pages. So I was like, wow, this has like really great pacing that a lot of YA books don't tend to have. So that was interesting. The things about this book, why I couldn't have rated this book a 5-star for me personally, though, despite liking it and like what it was doing with the Three Musketeers. Even though, you know, I can't tell you I've read the original Three Musketeers. I have not yet. That's something I want to do eventually. But what little limited knowledge I had, I did like what was being depicted here. Some of the things why I couldn't rate it a complete 5-star, though, for me, was I felt like this book needed, one, to be longer. Despite all of its pacing and everything, it did need to be longer. And this book also felt like it was the first in a series, but I don't know if it is. I don't know. It doesn't say anything as if it's going to have another one. But that's also why I couldn't rate it higher, because the way it ended, it felt like there were some loose ends, basically. Like, one of the loose ends is like there's this guy that she meets, the main character. There's this guy she meets, and it's kind of implied by the end that they might end up having a thing, but it doesn't fully go into there. So at the same time, it's like, okay, but you're introducing something that might happen, so where the hell is the next one? You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, I just wanted this really to be a little longer to explore some of that. But a lot of the side characters did get a lot of exploration too, so that was really good. So for that reason, yeah, One for All was a great read in the month of February. But let's go now into the next one. Okay, the next book that I read in the month of February happened to be this one. This is Parable of the Sower. This is by a legend in the speculative fic realm. This is a book by Octavia E. Butler. Mainly, I read this book because, well, it's been sitting on my TBR a long time, but part of it was like, okay, I figured, here's something I need to say right off the bat. I believe that people should always be reading diverse books. So sometimes when people go out of their way to be like, oh, I read this book because it's, because February happens to be in America, you know, like, Black History Month, right? People sometimes will feel obligated, like the whole month long, they read books by Black authors just in that month, though. See what I'm saying? Like, sometimes I hate when people are like, oh, I'm only going to read books. Yeah, but it's Black History Month. Let me read books by Black authors. But then you notice they only read those books during that month. So it's just like, that kind of annoys me. I think people should just be reading diversely all the time. But I figured, even though I normally intersperse like books by everybody, I decided at least to have one book by a Black author during the month of February, so I read Parable of the Sower, and I have to say, my God, guys, this book, I had feelings, I had thoughts, I had opinions. This is a dystopian, I should specify, this is a dystopian book, so I should have known what I was getting into, again, with more depressing of a read during the month of February. But this is a book that people were saying was really good by Octavia Butler, and I wanted to get into her books because I've heard about her for a while. I knew she had a lot of different books, but I was not happy with some of the things going on in here. So let's talk about some things, okay? First off, I did rate this book 4 stars because the writing in this book was not bad at all. I liked the way it was formatted. It was written kind of like in style of like diary entries, but it was from the voice, of that main character, so that was really good. The plot made sense in the progression it was going. And I also liked that this book took place in California. Even though it was a dystopian book, it took place in like some version of California, and considering I live in California, I was able to recognize a lot of the cities and stuff they were talking about. The book starts mainly in Southern California, though, so there was some stuff down there I wasn't as familiar with. But when the main character eventually makes the journey north, I was able to recognize a lot of those cities. And by the way, does it say in here? Oh, yeah. The main character, so in the start of the story, she is 15 years old, but her name is Lauren. That's right. I want to mention Lauren because there's a lot mentioned in here. And I did... See, this is why, even though this book is dystopian and takes place in California, it's like slightly different of a world, of course, being dystopian than we live in. I also liked, another positive for this book is the main character, Lauren. I did like that she had this ability. It's basically like a superpower, but it was like hyper empathy is what the book called it, hyper empathy. I liked the way it was introduced because even though she was hyper empathetic, there was a lot of like consequence to it. So it's like, okay, you were able to tell how people are feeling, but it does affect her negatively, especially like in ways when people were being harmed and hurt and all that stuff. So it was interesting how consistent that was within the book. So I liked that. But let's talk about the parts of this book that I was not as keen on, okay? One of the things is, so this is dystopian, but this is a very, 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 very bleak dystopian book. There are very, very casual mentions of trigger warning topics in this book. So again, if you are going to get into this book, I would encourage you to check out those trigger warnings first, because I was not aware of everything that was going into this, unfortunately. Like, people just don't mention it when they talk about like, oh yeah, this book is so good. Cool. What the hell were the trigger warnings though? Because what in the world, like some of the things I was getting into, okay? Casual mentions of things like sexual assault, people dying, people being killed, like brutally murdered, things around like child molestation, all this like very, very, very trigger. Like when I'm talking about trigger warning topics, I really mean this book basically did the gamut of all of those. Be safe. Like, if you do not like those things, like I was not a fan of how casual the main character was mentioning some of these things. Just be aware, right? And don't maybe read this if that's not going to be your jam. Because yes, another thing I did not like about this book is that, of course, it was really depressing, being that it was dystopian. And another thing I did not like, and this is just me personally, right? This isn't necessarily like the worst thing, but I did not like this. By the end of the book, the MC is already 18, 19-ish age, but she ends up with this guy who is, let's just say he's at least 20, if not 30 years older than her. She ends up with him. And it makes sense in the context of the story because they were traveling and like, he's not a bad dude, but I was very uncomfortable with the fact that she was with someone who was that much older than her. especially because their relationship was sexual. So basically, there's a lot of stuff in this book that made me very uncomfortable, and it was hard. It was hard. It was hard. So, my general thoughts is I can see how this book is popular. I can see why, like, the things it did for the dystopian genre, like groundbreaking stuff, things they're talking about. But based on how depressing it was, how trigger warning a lot of the things were, for one, I'm probably never going to reread this book. And two, I have no interest in reading the second book because after realizing this book had so many trigger warnings and other things, I did look up the plot of the second one and basically just said, nope, 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 no. So not continuing that. It's just unfortunate. Again, it was like, it was well written. I was just so annoyed with like some of the things that were going on. It's like, I get that this is a dystopian book, but we do not need to be this depressing. Like, I don't know. It was too much for me. So anyways, let's talk about some other books that were a little bit better than this. Okay. Next book. After reading A Parable of the Sower, I needed something that was not going to be as depressing for me. So I read this book. This is called A Magic Steeped in Poison, and this is by Judy I. Lin. This is a YA fantasy. This is the first book in a duology. I did read the second book. I am going to talk about that after, but let's start with this one, right? This book, I liked this book. This one I gave also, though, 4.5 stars. And so, good things about this book. General things. For those who do not know, this is a fantasy book inspired by, very loosely inspired by Eastern Asia, specifically China. And it's centered around tea magic. So, the magic system is that people can kind of do magic around the art of tea and the tea ceremony. And I ultimately enjoyed this one. I was curious to see how the second book would shape up in the duology. So that's part of the reason why I gave it a 4.5 and not a 5 star. Some good things about this book, right, is that it had that interesting and unique magic system. Like, I really liked how the tea stuff was depicted and talked about. The setup for the romance in this one also felt really good. It felt natural, like the two that were the romantic couple, Ning and Kang. They were nice in this one. I really liked how the setup was going for them. It felt like a good pace. And also, this world felt very detailed and explored, despite this book also not being very long. I think this one was also somewhere, yeah, it was around the same ballpark as One for All, but around 350-something-ish pages. So despite all that, I thought this was really good. Some things in this, though, that kind of let it down for me a little bit, and why I, again, could not give this book 5 stars, was that, so Ning, the main character, she meets this girl named Lian. I think I'm pronouncing it Lian, maybe? I don't know. It's Lian. Someone who is better versed in Chinese, like, pronunciation, please tell me. But Lian and Ning were supposed to be besties in this book, but I didn't 100% believe their friendship. And what I mean by that is that the way that Lian was in the book, like the way that she'd pop in and out and stuff like that, I almost thought she was going to betray the MC, and she doesn't, by the way. So spoiler there, she does not betray the MC at all, not even in the second book, not at all. But the way she was set up, it's like I just didn't believe that those two were actually friends. Like, I kept thinking Lian was like gonna stab her in the back or something. I don't know. It was very strange, just the way that she was written. And also, some of the villains in this one at first seemed very cartoonish. They were not fully developed until the second book. I'll talk more about that then, but that's also why I couldn't at first rate this book higher, because, yeah, I just needed a little more in those parts. But, like I said, after this book, I actually read a book in between. So let me talk about that one first before going to the second book in this duology. The book I read before reading the second book was this one. This is O Pioneers by Willa Cather. This is an American classic taking place in, I believe it starts, well, actually, I don't know. The book spans a long period of time, but I think it starts somewhere in like the late 20s, early 30s, like 1930s, I mean, in American history. If I'm correct, I don't remember 100%. It's yeah. But anyways, this is a classic. I had never read this. The reason why I read this, because my book challenge, one of the little flaps in it says to ask a family member about a book that they thought was very profound or influenced them a lot. And I asked my sister, and she said this one. And I was like, what? I have never read this. And this is a pretty small book, okay? So O Pioneers is basically a family saga. It features the main character, Alexandra, is like the oldest child of this family who immigrated from, I think it was either Russia or Poland. One of them. No. Sorry, not Russia or Poland. Their family immigrated from Sweden. There we go. And the dad was trying to run a farm. He dies early. And basically, because he dies early, he has to give this farm to his oldest. So he gives it to Alexandra, the girl. And she has to basically turn this farm around. And interestingly, she does. She makes them all very rich because she has like 3 brothers, and thanks to her smarts, they basically all get very rich. But it follows the family saga because there's a lot more drama and things that happen, especially with the brothers, like starting to feel entitled and very sexist and some of that stuff. So let's get into it. I actually rated this book again 4.5 stars. I feel like a lot of books this month were somewhere in that range, at 4.5 for me, but they just couldn't make it all the way to be a 5-star for me. And some of the reasons why I like this book is that the writing was really good. I do understand, like, I asked my sister later why she liked this book a lot, and a lot of it for her was that the writing is very descriptive and beautiful. The way it's presented feels very alive, like you could see this world very clearly, because I believe they're in Nebraska or something like that. The plot was also very consistent, and it followed their lives for like at least a span of over, I think it was over like 20 something years. It talked about the family, even though Alexandra was the main character. And so in that way, the characters also felt very alive. So that was a plus for this book. It's well written. And also just better than some of the classics I've read, you know. But the reason why I could not give this book a 5-star, in my opinion, I know it's silly, some of these like discrepancies, right? But the reason why I had to give this book a 4.5 and not a 5 was because the ending let me down a little bit. The main character, Alexandra, she got weirdly judgmental at the end of the book when I don't want to give spoilers, but basically something happens with one of her brothers and basically, and also her best friend, by the way. Brother and one of her best friends, something involving them, and she gets weirdly judgmental about it at the end, and I'm like, girl, what the hell are you doing? Like, what? Especially because this book was very like early feminist leaning too, by the way, because it talked about like trying to be an owner of something when you're just a woman and people are like trying to like degrade you, you know. Had a lot of like good stuff around that. And also, at the same time, not only was the MC getting, like, randomly judgy at the very end for, like, things that happen, but she also, I thought, could have been more prevalent in this book. And what I mean by that is that this book does a good job of, like, focusing on not only Alexandra, but, like, everybody involved in this family. So it does shift the perspectives a lot, where you get like the brother Emil, and then you get like her bestie's point of view, and then it's like back to her, and then back to the side character, and back to this. So she didn't get as much prominence as I thought she was in some ways. So that was also why I had to rate this a little lower. But this was honestly, though, better than a lot of the classics I read. So Willa Cather, I know she has some other books. I might have to take a chance on some of them, but I hope they're not as weirdly judgmental near the end as it was for this. But anyways, moving on. The last book I read in the month of February was the second book in the duology. So A Magic Steeped in Poison was the first one. The second book was A Venom Dark and Sweet. And I do have to say, unfortunately, that the second book for me was a 4-star read. It was not a 4.5, not even a 5, could not get that for me because of some stuff. So let's talk about this. So this is the second book. I don't want to spoil anything in these books too. That's why I'm trying to like kind of be vague in some ways. But anyways, overall, I thought this was a good story with a good plot. But my big thing was that when I realized, okay, there's only 2 books in this. This is a duology. If I look at the first book and I look at the second book, I felt that the 2 were a bit disjointed, because the first book is about the tea magic and the fact that the main character Ning has to, she's competing to be like the head, what did the book call them? Oh my god, I'm going to butcher this because it's supposed to be in Chinese pronunciation. I don't know shit about Chinese pronunciation. I think she was supposed to be called, supposed to be a Shinong Shi or something like that. She was competing basically to be the head tea person, but shit hits the fan at the end of that first book, and that doesn't happen. So in the second book, she has to basically go on the run with the Empress of their world, inspired by, again, it's a fantasy story inspired by China, but it's not, it's its own fantasy world. But she has to go on the run. And part of it was that, like, because the first book was just like tournament, and then this book is just like, they're on the run, they're on a war, now we have a quest mission thing. It just felt very different. Like I almost wondered, why wasn't this book and that book just shoved into one book? You know what I mean? Because that's why the 2 just felt very different in that way. I mean, the ending of this was good, and it was suspenseful. And the world and the more of the historical bits of the world were really great. So I still had interest. And the book did make sense as a whole. Like, this book made sense. Like, the plot that it was going on, it made sense. It had good build up, all that stuff. But it did just feel a little disconnected from the first one there, because they were like completely different like setups. Like, one book is like a competition based setup, and the other is this like quest. So it felt a little different in that way. The other thing that kind of let this book, the second book, down is that that romance I briefly talked about that happened in the first book. Yeah, in the second book, it was pretty much non-existent. Like, the first book had a good build-up, and I thought there would be a little bit more done with that for the second book. But the second book, they didn't feel as, like, they do meet up, the 2 characters that are, like, a thing, like Ning and Kang. They felt, they do meet up again, and it's implied that they have a relationship, but there's no, like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, the romance didn't like fully flourish in that way by the end. So I was like, what the heck is going on here? It was like a will they, won't they kind of thing. But yeah, was not digging that as much. And again, the thing with Leanne, I'm like, girl, why? She's back again, but she's barely there. Like, is she actually relevant to this plot? I don't know. It was just like that, just one character who like kind of had a role, but she didn't, I don't know, she didn't feel as connected. So for that, I don't know, this book got a star less, but overall I did like this, and this is very unique and different, so I would recommend this. But yeah, that was it for books. I'm already 30 something minutes in, so we're going to talk about tarot now. Give me 1 second. Okay, everyone. Yes. Tarot. Let's talk about tarot. The things in tarot that happened during the month of February. First off, as you can see here, my card for the month of February happened to be the 9 of Wands. And let me tell you, I felt every single moment of this. It was a very busy month and kind of got chaotic, especially towards the end of the month. It did feel like I had to persevere a lot. Like I was going through a little bit of shit, not gonna lie. More again towards the end of the month, but it just felt like a lot of go, go, go and having to keep pushing forward. And so that was a little hard, I'm not gonna lie. But I made it through. Mostly. But these are the 4 decks that I used during the month of February. And I also have an oracle, so I'm going to show that, but let me move the cards over, okay? So the first deck that I used during the month of February happened to be this one. This is, sorry, this sprain is recent, so I'm like really awkward like with this. I'm barely using this hand right now. I'm left-handed too, so that sucks. It's just everything's awful. But anyways, the first deck that I used during the month of February was the Uncommon Tarot. This is a mass market tarot deck. These are the backs. Not gonna lie, I do not like this cardstock. I've talked about this though with this deck when I got it new. As you can see, it's kind of very high gloss, and when you touch it, it verges on being that cardstock where it's so glossy, it feels like you're touching a photograph basically. So not fun. Verges on that. It's like kind of okay, but it's like kind of not. But anyways, this is a deck that is very pretty in its depictions of things. As you can see, it's like a collage deck too. But for some reason, I used this deck once to do a week ahead reading. And I also used this deck a little bit when I was doing my court cards and practice video. I did show it, but after that, I did not feel any draw to pull this deck out again. I think part of it is that like the collage work is an interesting blend of things, and some of the choices in it feel a little questionable. So do I think this deck might be in my collection for the long term? Probably not. Like I do want to try to use it a little bit more before coming to that final conclusion, but I don't see this being a deck that's going to stay in my collection forever because, yeah, I think part of the experience is this like kind of terrible cardstock, to be honest. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think this will be in my collection forever, but I wanted to use it during the month of February, so I did. But that was the Uncommon Tarot. Another deck I used during the month of February, and I use this one a little bit more. My Zerner Farber Tarot. I have the newest iteration of this deck. This deck has had a few iterations. These are the backs. This deck still works for me. Still worked for me during the whole month of February. February was a month where I was picking decks that kind of had like a, I don't know. It just had that vibe that kind of blended Valentine's and what I think February is all about together. Oh, sorry. I'm like also partially sick right now, so yeah, that sucks. But anyways, this deck still did its job. I did a few readings with this deck. I also took this deck to the tarot meetup group I had and did a reading there with it. So, yeah, this You guys have seen this deck, though, around on my page, so I don't want to talk about this forever, but still worked, still did its job in February, and I always just like using this deck. So this is the Zerner Farber. What else did I use? Sorry, I'm like trying to move stuff around, but it's like this arm is like basically useless right now, so not great. Oh, this deck. I also used this deck. This chunky thing with its like gold matte edging is the Lioness Oracle Tarot. This deck is a massive whopping. Normally, I still am awkward using this, and it's even more awkward now when I only have one hand. But, this one, wow. This deck is one that I did 1 week ahead spread with, and unfortunately did not do anything else. I originally planned to do like a bigger reading using this deck, but it just did not happen. I did not have the time in February to do any more readings with this one. It just, the way that things aligned, I just didn't get to do more, which again is kind of like sad because I actually did want to do more of a reading. And by the way, I did get this card though as one of my week ahead spreads, like what I did with this. I love this version of the Two of Swords. I feel like I need to talk about that sometime, but like that is like one of the, that's up there now and one of the better ones I've seen. But yeah, this is a deck I've been wanting to use more of. I just didn't get that chance. So is what it is, but that is the Lioness Oracle Tarot. And the last deck, tarot deck, because I am going to mention what Oracle I used too. The last tarot deck I used during the month of February was my Eldritch Overload Tarot. This is a deck that I did, again, oops, this is upside down. This is a deck, again, that I did a week ahead spread with. And then I also use this for my court card and practice video. I did use this deck as an example to show people. But I wanted to do more with this deck too, and I just didn't have time. Like, I wanted to do an extra reading with this deck, but it didn't, stars did not align once again. It was just not happening. But what I did do, because this deck was one of the decks I was working with in the month of February, I did read through this. This is, I originally did not get this with the book, but Weird Works, the people who make this deck, they put this back on their website. So if you recently got this deck, you can get the tarot reading guide now, the codex, right? So this is really good. Oh, by the way, yes, I do want to do a walkthrough of this deck with my thoughts and opinions, but it's really good in here. I did read that. So I have thoughts. I just need to schedule time to actually do that walkthrough. Like my thoughts, you know, my deep thoughts on this deck, because this is a deck inspired by D&D. I love D&D, but it's also very dystopian and cyberpunk. So there's a lot of cool and interesting things in this deck. And it's beautiful. Like, if you like fantasy, you like science fiction, you like all that, this is basically the deck for you. And I loved just what was being featured here. But yeah, I did not have as much time as I thought to do more readings with this deck. So that was a pity. But it is what it is. Again, February was just a very strange, fast-paced month for me. So it was a little hard. But finally, what Oracle deck did I use? Usually during the month, every month, I have at least 4 tarot decks and 1 Oracle deck that I will use. So my Oracle deck is now in this pouch. This is one I got off of Etsy. It's very big because I needed to fit this chunker. You guys will probably remember. This is the Creativity Oracle. This is also by Amy Zerner and Monty Farber. And this is a weird one because, as you can see, the pictures are, the images are on the backs. And then the fronts have the keyword and they're little, it's like a little paragraph, or not paragraph, like a sentence or so that explains what they are. I did a walkthrough of this video, not walkthrough, a flip through of this video basically a little bit ago, so you guys can check that out. I go through every card, but this deck is massive, as you can see. This is 80 cards. And my thoughts on this deck were, funny enough, again, February just felt very fast-paced. I felt like I did not have enough time to pull a lot of cards with this. I would pull one basically a day. Near the end of the month, I tried pulling 3 at a time. But I just didn't have all the time in the world. But the keywords in it aren't bad. I think what got me too, and like why I felt myself not gravitating towards this as much as, say, what I was using last month in January, had to do a little bit with the fact that this is, even though the keywords are good in this, it is geared more towards creativity. So I was starting to become creative in February. Like by the end of the month, like something had taken root, and I'm not going to get into that right now, but I was starting to get creative. So I feel like this could have helped more, but again, just timing. This deck's also really chunky, so it's just like kind of hard to carry around. But I did take this deck also the day I did my tarot meetup, because I was explaining about oracles and how they could work with tarot, and I was using this one and the Zerner Farber as its like perfect pair, you know, to talk about. But yeah. But anyways, those were all the decks. And I feel like in parts I was rushing this video, but I'm in like half paint. I'm going to need to ice this again. But I did want to tell you guys what I did in February. So if you watch this long, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all again next time. Bye!